Did you just hit her? How dare you? How dare you put your hands on my daughter?
Those words, sharp as a slap, still echo in my mind. My daughter-in-law Emily said them with such theatrical horror, pointing at my granddaughter Sophie like I was some kind of monster. Standing in my own kitchen, the one I'd kept spotless for 50 years, accused of violence against a child I adored, I felt something inside me crack open. But here's what she didn't know. I was recording every venomous word, and by the time I was done with her, that pretty mask of hers would shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Let me tell you how it all began. I've always believed that manners define the measure of a person. My father used to say, "Margaret, a person's soul shows in how they treat others when no one's watching." After teaching elementary school for 40 years, I carried that belief like a compass. It guided every lesson, every gentle correction, every patient smile. Now, at 74, I live with my husband Charles in Serenity Pines, a quiet senior community just outside Portland. Our days are simple: tea at 9, letters from old friends, the occasional phone call from our son David. He's a pilot, and his voice always carries that steady confidence I remember from when he was a boy learning to ride his bike without training wheels. When David first brought Emily home 3 years ago, I thought we'd been blessed. She was elegant, refined, the kind of woman who knew which fork to use and how to arrange flowers in a way that made the whole room feel lighter. She smiled warmly, called me Mom with what seemed like genuine affection, and complimented my cooking with words that felt sincere. "This pot roast is heavenly," she'd say, touching my arm gently. "You'll have to teach me your secret." I remember thinking, she'll keep our family's dignity alive. She understands what matters. Charles felt it too. After dinner one evening, as we washed dishes side by side, our comfortable rhythm unchanged by 52 years of marriage, he said quietly, "David chose well. She has grace." I nodded, drying a plate with slow, methodical circles. The porcelain was warm under my fingertips, smooth and familiar. But even then, something flickered at the edge of my awareness. A hesitation in Emily's smile when she thought no one was looking. The way her eyes would sweep across our modest living room, calculating, assessing. Once, I caught her studying the faded wallpaper with an expression I couldn't quite name, something between pity and disdain. I pushed the feeling aside. "You're being silly," I told myself. "She's young, she's adjusting." The first real dinner we hosted after their wedding felt like a test I hadn't known I was taking. Emily arrived in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. She brought wine, expensive, French, the kind with a label I couldn't pronounce. "I thought we'd elevate the evening a bit," she said brightly, handing the bottle to Charles. "Elevate." The word stuck with me, as if our usual table, set with the china my mother had passed down, wasn't already elevated by love and history. During dinner, she complimented everything with that same practiced warmth, but when she thought I'd stepped into the kitchen, I heard her whisper to David, "Do they always use such vintage serving dishes?" Vintage. Another word for old. Another word for not good enough. I stood frozen in the doorway, a serving spoon growing heavy in my hand. The smell of roasted chicken hung in the air, suddenly making me feel tired instead of proud. David laughed it off. "Mom loves those dishes. They're family heirlooms." "Of course," Emily replied smoothly. "How sentimental." The way she said sentimental, it wasn't a compliment. I returned to the table with a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. Charles squeezed my hand under the table, his calloused fingers rough and reassuring. He couldn't have heard her. He was half deaf in his left ear since the factory accident 20 years ago. But I heard, and I filed it away in the quiet archive of my mind where uncomfortable truths go to wait. As the months passed, those small moments accumulated like dust in corners you don't notice until the light hits them just right. Emily's comments grew subtler, wrapped in concern. "Maybe you should rest more, Mom. You look exhausted." Translation, "You look old." "This neighborhood is so quaint." Translation, "Dated, poor, beneath me." She never said anything outright cruel. That would have been too obvious, too easy to call out. Instead, she wielded politeness like a blade, cutting precisely, leaving wounds that didn't bleed but ached nonetheless. I began to understand. Emily's grace was a performance, and I was watching from the wings, seeing all the mechanisms behind her elegant facade. The worst part? David didn't see it. How could he? She saved her sweetest voice for him, her most devoted expressions. When he was home, which wasn't often given his flight schedule, she played the perfect wife with an actress's precision. But when it was just Emily and me, when Charles dozed in his chair and the house grew quiet, her mask would slip, just a fraction, just enough. One afternoon, she reorganized my spice cabinet without asking. I thought I'd help, she said cheerfully, as if she'd done me a favor. But standing there, looking at my carefully alphabetized jars now arranged by color, I felt violated in a way I couldn't articulate. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled. "Someone has to keep things modern around here." That night, I stood at my bedroom window, watching the moon cast long shadows across our small garden. Charles was already asleep, his breathing steady and deep. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and thought about my father's words. A person's soul shows in how they treat others when no one's watching. What happens, I wondered, when someone shows you their soul, and it's rotten underneath? And what happens when you realize that silence, the grace you've practiced all your life, might actually be cowardice? I didn't have answers yet, but standing there in the dark, something inside me shifted, like a door opening onto a room I'd been afraid to enter. I didn't know then that within weeks Emily would say something so cruel it would break the last thread of my patience. I didn't know I'd end up wandering cold streets at dawn, whispering truths to myself that no one else would hear. But I was beginning to understand that grace without boundaries isn't grace at all. It's just surrender. The surrender ended the day Charles lost his business. It was a Tuesday in late October when he came home early, his face the color of old newspaper. The recession had finally caught up with us. After 38 years of running his small hardware store, the one his father had started, the one he'd poured his entire life into, the bank had foreclosed. I found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his hands like they belonged to a stranger. The afternoon light came through the window, making the dust motes visible, turning everything golden and sad at the same time. "It's gone, Margaret," he said quietly, his voice stripped of everything but exhaustion. "All of it. Gone." I reached for his hand. His skin felt cold despite the warmth of the room. We sat there in silence and I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second a small hammer tap reminding us that time doesn't stop for grief. Charles had always been proud, not in an arrogant way, but in that quiet manner of men who've built something with their own hands. He'd wake at 5 every morning, make his own coffee, drive to the store before sunrise. He knew every customer by name, remembered their children's birthdays, gave credit to families who were struggling. Now, watching him shrink into himself, I felt something crack in my chest. Not just sadness, anger. Raw, hot anger at a world that could discard a good man's decades of work like yesterday's trash. But I smiled. I always smiled. "We'll be fine," I told him gently, squeezing his fingers. "We have each other." "We have enough." He nodded, but his eyes stayed empty. Emily called that evening. David must have told her. Her voice came through the phone speaker. Charles's hearing had gotten worse, so we always use speakerphone now, dripping with a concern that felt rehearsed. "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry," she cooed, her tone sickeningly sweet. "You must be devastated. If there's anything we can do." The offer hung in the air, hollow as a drum. Charles thanked her stiffly. After he hung up, he went to bed at 7:30, something he'd never done in all our years together. I sat alone in the living room, listening to the house settle around me, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on my shoulders. The next morning, Emily showed up unannounced. She breezed through our front door wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than our electric bill. Her perfume, something floral and expensive, filled our small entryway, overwhelming the familiar smell of coffee and toast. "I wanted to check on you both," she announced brightly, as if she were doing charity work. Her heels clicked against our hardwood floors, each step sounding like judgment. Charles was still in bed. He'd barely spoken since yesterday, barely eaten. The light had gone out of him, and I didn't know how to turn it back on. Emily walked through our house like she was conducting an inspection. She ran her finger along the bookshelf, examining it for dust. She studied our furniture with that same calculating expression I'd seen before, only now it felt sharper, more predatory. "You know," she said thoughtfully, turning to face me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "this house really could use some updating. It feels so inefficient. Inefficient, not cozy, not lived in, not filled with 50 years of memories." I felt my jaw tighten. "We like it the way it is," I replied evenly, though my voice came out thinner than I intended. She laughed, a light musical sound that somehow managed to be condescending. "Of course you do. I just mean with your new circumstances you might want to consider downsizing. Simplifying your new circumstances." She meant poverty, she meant failure. "We're managing just fine," I said quietly, my hands curling into fists at my sides. Emily moved to the window, looking out at our garden where Charles's tomato plants were dying back for winter. "I'm only trying to help, Mom," she said softly, her voice now edged with something harder. "Someone needs to think practically about your future." The presumption stole my breath. She'd been part of this family for 3 years. 3 years, and suddenly she was the authority on our lives? But I held my tongue. I swallowed the words that wanted to escape, because that's what I'd always done. Swallow, smile, endure. Over the following weeks, Emily's visits became more frequent, and with each one, her veneer of politeness grew thinner, more transparent. She'd rearrange our kitchen cupboards while I was out. "Just making things more functional," she'd say breezily when I discovered my grandmother's teacups moved to a shelf I couldn't reach without a stool. She'd suggest we cancel our newspaper subscription. "You can read everything online. Save money. Never mind that Charles loved his morning paper, loved the ritual of unfolding it with his coffee, the satisfying rustle of pages turning." She'd comment on my clothes. "That sweater's looking a bit worn, isn't it? I can take you shopping sometime, teach you how to dress on a budget." Her smile was bright, helpful, poisonous. Each comment was wrapped in concern, tied with a bow of false generosity. But underneath, I heard the real message. "You're not good enough. You never were." And now, without money to hide behind, everyone can see it. Charles retreated further into himself. He'd sit in his chair for hours, staring at nothing, his hands folded in his lap like empty promises. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with such sadness that I had to turn away before tears came. One afternoon, Emily found me hand-washing dishes. Our dishwasher had broken, and we couldn't afford to fix it yet. She stood behind me, and I could feel her presence like a cold draft. "You should let me help you," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "Let me reorganize things, make this place more manageable for people your age. People your age, as if we were children who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects." I turned to face her, my hands dripping soapy water onto the linoleum. For a moment, I almost said what I was really thinking. Almost told her exactly where she could put her helpful suggestions. But I looked at her perfectly made-up face, her expensive clothes, her manicured nails that had never scrubbed a floor, or changed a diaper, or held a dying parent's hand. And I realized something. She wanted me to break. She was pushing, prodding, waiting for me to snap so she could tell David, "See? Your mother's unstable. She attacked me for trying to help." So instead, I smiled. That same smile I'd perfected over 74 years of swallowing bitter pills. "Thank you, Emily," I said quietly, "but we're fine." She studied my face for a long moment, and I saw frustration flicker across her features. Then she smiled back, and it was like watching a snake bare its teeth. "Of course," she said sweetly. I'm just worried about you both. Family takes care of family, after all. After she left, I stood at the sink, my hands plunged into cold dishwater that had lost its bubbles. I looked out the window at our small backyard, where Charles had once grown roses, where we'd hosted barbecues and birthday parties, where our grandchildren had played. And I understood, with absolute clarity, that Emily wasn't trying to help us. She was trying to erase us. That night, lying next to Charles's sleeping form, listening to his labored breathing in the dark, I made a decision. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But I knew this. Silence wasn't grace anymore, it was surrender, and I was done surrendering. The pharmacy was bright and sterile, smelling of antiseptic and floor wax. I stood in the electronics aisle, staring at a display of voice recorders like they were weapons I was afraid to touch, which, in a way, they were. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the smallest one, a sleek black device no bigger than a USB drive. The package promised crystal clear audio and up to 20 hours of recording time. 20 hours to capture the truth that everyone else seemed deaf to. The young clerk, he couldn't have been more than 25, smiled at me cheerfully. "Getting that for lectures?" he asked, scanning the barcode. "Something like that," I murmured, avoiding his eyes. I paid cash, $32.17. I remember the exact amount because my hand shook as I counted out the bills, and I dropped a quarter that rolled under the counter. The clerk retrieved it with easy grace, the kind of movement that reminded me how old I'd become. Walking back to my car, the small bag felt heavy in my purse. Heavier than it should have been, because I knew what it meant. I was crossing a line I'd never imagined crossing. Recording someone without their knowledge felt dishonest, invasive, wrong. But then I thought of Emily's smile, her helpful suggestions, her systematic dismantling of our dignity, piece by piece. Sometimes I realized the only way to prove the truth is to trap it. That evening, Emily called. She wanted to drop by the next day to help organize the garage. Charles was in the shower, so I was alone when I answered. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully into the phone, my voice steady even as my heart hammered. "What time were you thinking?" "Around 11? Her tone was bright, efficient. "I'll bring lunch." "You probably haven't been shopping much." The implication stung that we couldn't afford groceries, that we needed her charity. I closed my eyes and counted to 3 before responding. 11 is fine," I said quietly. "See you then." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and unwrapped the recorder. The instructions were printed in tiny font that I had to squint to read. I fumbled with the batteries, my arthritic fingers making the simple task harder than it should have been. But I got it working. I tested it, recording myself saying, "This is Margaret Harris, November 15th. My voice played back tinny and strange, like hearing yourself on an answering machine. I sounded older than I felt, tired. I practiced hiding it in my cardigan pocket, clipped inside my apron, tucked into the fruit bowl on the counter. Each location had advantages and risks. Too close, and she might hear the faint click when I pressed record. Too far, and I might miss crucial words. Charles emerged from the bathroom, his hair still damp, wearing the flannel robe I'd given him for Christmas 15 years ago. The collar was frayed now, but he refused to replace it. "Who was that on the phone?" he asked, his voice flat with the depression that had settled over him like fog. "Emily, she's coming tomorrow to help with the garage." He nodded absently, not really listening. He shuffled to his chair and picked up a magazine without opening it, just held it in his lap, staring at nothing. I wanted to tell him what I was planning, wanted to share this small rebellion, this tiny act of resistance. But Charles was barely holding himself together. Adding my burden to his would have been cruel. So I kept quiet, again. But this time, silence served a purpose. Emily arrived at 10:47 the next morning, early of course, to catch us unprepared. I heard her car in the driveway, heard her heels clicking up our walkway, heard her key turning in our lock. Our lock. She had a key. David had given it to her for emergencies, but she used it like she owned the place. The recorder was in my apron pocket, already running. I'd started it 5 minutes earlier, my thumb fumbling with the small button until I heard the nearly imperceptible beep. "Hello," Emily sang out, her voice echoing through our small house. "Anyone home?" I came out of the kitchen, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Good morning, Emily," I said calmly, though my pulse was racing. "You're early." She laughed lightly, dismissively. "Time is money, Mom." "Figured we'd get started. Where's Dad?" "Still in bed," I replied quietly, feeling a flush of shame even though I knew Charles's exhaustion wasn't laziness. It was grief. Emily's eyebrows rose slightly. "Still?" "It's almost 11. Her tone was all concern, but her eyes held judgment, cold and measuring. She set down a bag from an expensive deli. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled our entryway, making my stomach rumble. We'd been eating a lot of soup lately. Cheap, filling, depressing. "I brought lunch," she announced, as if bestowing a great gift. "Figured you two could use something decent." Something decent, as if what I cooked wasn't good enough, as if our simple meals were shameful. I forced a smile. "That's kind of you." We moved to the kitchen, and I watched her survey the space with that familiar calculating expression. She touched the curtains I'd sewn myself 30 years ago, her fingers lingering on a small stain I'd never managed to remove. "These are pretty worn," she commented softly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe it's time to replace them." "I could help you find something more modern, more appropriate for your situation. Your situation. Code for your poverty." "They're fine," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. The recorder in my pocket felt like a talisman giving me strength. Emily turned to face me fully, and her mask slipped, just for a second. I saw irritation flash across her features, quickly smoothed away. "Mom," she said gently, reaching out to touch my arm with her perfectly manicured hand. "I'm only trying to help. You have to admit, this place is looking a bit neglected. David and I are worried about you both." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed she actually cared. "We're managing," I replied quietly, pulling my arm away with a subtle movement that could have been accidental. She sighed, a long-suffering sound that made my teeth clench. "Are you, though?" Because from where I'm standing, things seem to be falling apart. The words hung between us, sharp and cruel. I opened my mouth to respond, but then Charles appeared in the doorway. He was still in his pajamas, his hair uncombed, his face drawn. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 months ago. Emily's expression shifted instantly, concern replacing condescension like flipping a switch. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice warm and sympathetic. "How are you feeling?" Charles mumbled something non-committal and shuffled to his chair without meeting her eyes. Emily watched him with barely concealed disappointment, and I knew what she was thinking. Pathetic. She turned back to me, and her smile was all pity now. "Mom, can I talk to you privately?" she asked softly, gesturing toward the hallway. My hand instinctively moved to my pocket, feeling the recorder's small, solid shape. "Of course," I said. We stepped into the hallway out of Charles's earshot. Emily leaned close, and I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something else, something sharp and bitter beneath the floral notes. "I'm really concerned," she whispered, her voice dripping with false intimacy. "Dad's not himself. And you're clearly struggling to keep up with everything. Maybe it's time to consider—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Consider what?" I prompted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Assisted living," she said gently, as if suggesting a vacation. "Somewhere with support. Where you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this old house. Where professionals could help." The words hit me like a physical blow. She wanted us in a home, out of the way, erased. Before I could respond, she continued, her voice gaining confidence. "David and I have been talking. We think it's for the best. You're both getting older, and with your financial situation—" She trailed off meaningfully. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the recorder in my pocket like a lifeline. And then she said it, the thing that made everything crystal clear. "Besides," she murmured so quietly I almost missed it. "If it weren't for me, this whole family would fall apart. Someone has to be practical. Someone has to make the hard decisions." Her words echoed in my head, cold and arrogant. I looked at her perfect face, her designer clothes, her absolute certainty that she was right, and I smiled. "Let me think about it," I said softly. She beamed, mistaking my calm for surrender. "Of course. Take your time. We just want what's best for you." After she left, I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the silence of my house. Then I pulled out the recorder and pressed stop. The red light blinked off. I had her. For 3 weeks, I collected Emily's words like evidence at a crime scene. Each recording was a small victory. Her condescending comments about our outdated furniture, her whispered phone conversations where she called us a burden and so stubborn, her suggestions to David, yes, I recorded those too when she put him on speaker, that we were declining mentally and couldn't be trusted to make decisions anymore. I kept the recorder with me constantly, in my apron while cooking, in my cardigan pocket during her visits, hidden in the tissue box on the coffee table when she stayed for tea. The tiny device became my companion, my witness, my validation that I wasn't imagining things. Charles noticed me being more alert during Emily's visits, sitting straighter, speaking more carefully. One evening after she'd left, he looked at me with those sad, tired eyes. "You're different lately," he said quietly, his voice rough with disuse. "Stronger." I wanted to tell him everything, wanted to play the recordings, show him proof that his son's wife was systematically destroying us, but he was so fragile, so broken. The knowledge might shatter what little remained of him. "I'm just tired of being pushed around," I said gently, taking his hand. His skin felt papery, delicate as old parchment. He nodded slowly, then returned to his silence. It was a Tuesday morning, I remember, because Tuesday was my grocery shopping day, when I found the camera. I was reaching for the sugar canister on the counter, something I'd done 10,000 times before, when I noticed it. A small black lens, barely visible, mounted inside the decorative light fixture above the kitchen island. My hand froze mid-reach. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. But no, there it was, tiny and dark, pointed directly at the kitchen table where Charles and I ate our meals, where I prepared our food, where we lived our private lives. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears, a rushing sound, like standing too close to the ocean. I stepped back slowly, carefully, as if the camera might somehow sense my discovery. My eyes swept the kitchen looking for others. How long had it been there? What had it recorded? Who was watching? I already knew the answer to that last question. Emily had a key. Emily came and went as she pleased. Emily wanted us in assisted living, out of our home, stripped of our independence, and Emily needed evidence to prove we were incompetent. My hands were shaking as I walked to the living room, my mind racing. I looked up at the ceiling fan, the bookshelf, the lamp by Charles's chair, searching for other dark eyes watching us. The violation felt physical, like someone had slipped their hands around my throat. This was our home, our sanctuary, the place where we'd raised our son, celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, built a life together. And she'd turned it into a surveillance zone, a prison where our every move was documented. I thought about all the moments she might have captured. Charles in his pajamas at 2 p.m, defeated and small. Me crying quietly at the sink when I thought no one could see. Our arguments about money, about pride, about whether we should ask David for help. All of it recorded, all of it weaponized. I sat down heavily on the couch, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. The morning sun streamed through the windows, making dust motes dance in the air, and I felt like I was drowning in light. When Charles shuffled into the kitchen an hour later, I was still sitting there, staring at nothing. "Margaret?" His voice was concerned, more present than it had been in weeks. "Are you all right?" I looked at him, this man I'd loved for 52 years, and I made a decision. "Charles, I need to show you something." His eyes widened slightly, fear mixed with curiosity. I stood up and led him to the kitchen, positioning him where I'd been standing when I noticed it. "Look up," I said quietly, in the light fixture. "Tell me what you see." He squinted, his vision not what it used to be. Then his whole body went rigid. "Is that—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "A camera," I confirmed, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "Someone installed a camera in our kitchen." Charles's face transformed. The defeated, broken man disappeared, replaced by someone I remembered from years ago, strong, protective, angry. "Emily," he said, and it wasn't a question. "She has a key," I replied simply. We stood there together, staring up at that tiny lens, and I could feel something shifting between us. Charles's hand found mine, and his grip was firm, certain. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "I just found it this morning." "No." He turned to face me, his eyes sharp for the first time in months. "How long have you known she was—" He struggled for the word. "Destroying us." I looked at my husband, this good man who'd lost everything but his integrity, and I told him the truth. Since the beginning. That afternoon, we searched the house together. We found 3 more cameras. One in the living room, hidden behind a decorative vase Emily had given us for Christmas. One in the hallway, tucked into the smoke detector. One in our bedroom disguised as a charging block plugged into the wall. Each discovery was another violation, another invasion, another piece of evidence of how thoroughly she'd tried to control us. Charles's hands were steady as he carefully removed each one, placing them on the kitchen table like exhibits. 4 small cameras, 4 electronic eyes that had watched us in our most vulnerable moments. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice hard with controlled rage. I thought about the recorder in my drawer upstairs, filled with Emily's own words condemning her. I thought about the cameras now sitting on our table, proof of her obsessive need for control. "We document everything," I said firmly. We take pictures. We save the recordings. We build a case." "A case for what?" I looked at him directly. "For protecting our son. And for protecting ourselves." Charles nodded slowly, then reached for his phone, old and outdated but functional. He began taking pictures of each camera, his movements deliberate and methodical. "She called here yesterday," he said quietly while photographing the bedroom camera. "While you were at the store. Wanted to know if I'd thought more about assisted living. Said it would be easier on everyone if we just accepted it." "What did you say?" "I told her we'd think about it." He looked at me, his eyes blazing. "But I was lying." "We're not going anywhere, Margaret. This is our home." Pride surged through me, warm and fierce. My husband was back. That evening, Emily sent a text message. I saw it light up my phone screen as Charles and I sat at the kitchen table, the 4 cameras arranged between us like evidence at trial. The message was brief, cheerful, utterly oblivious. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Want to stop by tomorrow for lunch? I think we should talk more about your options. Love you, love you." The words made my stomach turn. I looked at Charles. He looked at the cameras. Then he looked at me. "Do you think she's watching now?" he asked quietly, wondering why the feeds went dark. "Probably," I replied. "Good." His smile was grim. Let her wonder. I typed a response, my fingers steady. "Tomorrow is fine. See you at noon." Charles reached across the table and took my hand. "What's the plan, Margaret?" I thought about the recorder upstairs. I thought about the cameras on our table. I thought about Emily's text, so sickeningly sweet, so perfectly manipulative. And I thought about something my father once told me. The best defense is patience. Let them think they've won, then strike when they least expect it. "The plan," I said slowly, meeting Charles's eyes, "is to let her think she's won. For now." And then I smiled, not my usual gentle smile, but something sharper, harder. And then we show our son exactly who he married. Charles squeezed my hand, and in that moment, I saw something I thought I'd lost. Hope. But I also knew we weren't done collecting evidence. Because the next time Emily came to our house, something would happen that would push everything past the point of return. Something involving my granddaughter. And when it did, that recorder would be ready. Sophie arrived with Emily that Saturday morning, all 9 years of her bundled in a pink jacket and clutching an iPad like it was oxygen. I hadn't seen my granddaughter in 2 months. Emily had been making excuses about schedules and germs and not wanting to expose Sophie to stress, which really meant keeping her away from us until we were properly disposed of. But there she was, stepping through our door with that same assessing look her mother wore, too young for such calculating eyes. "Hi, Grandma," she said flatly, not looking up from her screen. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied warmly, bending down to hug her. She tolerated it stiffly, her small body rigid with learned indifference. Emily swept in behind her, all smiles and designer athleisure wear. "Sorry for the surprise visit," she chirped, though nothing about her tone suggested apology. "David's flying back tonight, and I thought it would be nice for Sophie to spend time with you both before we have our family discussion." Family discussion, code for the intervention where they'd convince us to give up our home. The recorder was already running in my apron pocket. I'd started it the moment I heard the car pull up. "Of course," I said calmly, stepping aside to let them in. "Charles is in his chair. I'll make some tea." Sophie drifted to the couch without greeting her grandfather, her eyes glued to her screen. Charles looked at her with such longing, it broke my heart. He'd always adored his granddaughter, but Emily had been slowly severing that bond, visit by visit. I busied myself in the kitchen, listening to Emily's voice drift from the living room as she talked on her phone. She wasn't even trying to lower her voice. "No, they still haven't agreed," she was saying, irritation sharp in her tone. "I know, it's frustrating. They're being completely unreasonable about the whole thing." A pause. "Well, David gets back tonight, so hopefully he can talk sense into them." They listened to him. Another pause, then a cruel laugh. "Barely." "I mean, have you seen this place? It's like a time capsule of sadness. The sooner we get them somewhere with actual supervision, the better." My hands tightened on the teacup I was holding. The porcelain felt fragile, like it might shatter under my grip. I brought out a tray with tea and cookies, homemade chocolate chip, Sophie's favorite when she was younger. Before Emily decided that store-bought organic was somehow superior to Grandma's love baked into butter and sugar. "Here we are," I announced gently, setting the tray on the coffee table. Sophie glanced up briefly, her eyes barely registering the cookies before returning to her screen. "What do we say, Sophie?" Emily prompted, her voice saccharine. "Thank you," Sophie mumbled, not meaning it. I poured tea, my movements slow and deliberate. Charles watched me with knowing eyes. He could sense the tension coiling beneath my calm exterior. "Sophie, honey," I said softly, "would you like some milk for those cookies?" She shrugged without looking up. "I guess." I poured a glass of milk and set it beside her. "Here you go, sweetheart." "Why don't you put the iPad down for a bit and have a cookie with Grandma?" "I don't want to," Sophie whined, her voice taking on that petulant edge I'd never heard from her before. "I'm watching something." "Just for a few minutes," I coaxed gently. "Grandma made these special for you." "I said I don't want to." Her voice rose, sharp and bratty. I felt a prick of concern. This wasn't like Sophie, or at least not like the Sophie I remembered. Emily had changed her, reshaped her into something small and entitled. "Sophie," I said more firmly, "that's not a nice way to speak to Grandma." She rolled her eyes, actually rolled them, and reached for a cookie with obvious reluctance, her other hand still gripping the iPad. The tablet slipped, and her elbow caught the glass of milk. White liquid splashed across the coffee table, spreading in a pool that dripped onto our old carpet. "Ugh," Sophie groaned, throwing herself back against the couch dramatically. "This is so annoying, not I'm sorry, not oops, just annoyance, as if the milk had inconvenienced her personally. I grabbed napkins quickly, my old teacher instincts kicking in. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said gently, kneeling down despite my protesting knees. "Let's just clean it up. Accidents happen, but Sophie wasn't helping. She was still sprawled on the couch, sighing dramatically, acting put upon. "Sophie, honey, can you help Grandma?" I asked, keeping my voice patient. "Why?" "You're already doing it," she said dismissively, her eyes back on her screen. I felt something shift inside me, a small crack in my endless patience. "Because you spilled it, and it's polite to help clean up your own messes." "Mom says you have to clean up anyway because it's your house," Sophie replied, her tone matter-of-fact, parroting words she'd obviously heard before. The casual cruelty of it, the learned disrespect, made my chest tighten, but I kept my voice gentle. "That's not how we treat people we love, sweetheart. Come help Grandma, please." I was bent over, blotting the carpet, when I felt it. A sharp, sudden pain as small fingers grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked hard. "Ow!" The cry escaped before I could stop it. Tears sprang to my eyes from the shock and pain. I jerked upright, my hand flying to my scalp where it throbbed. Sophie stood behind me, her face defiant, almost pleased with herself. For a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. My own granddaughter had deliberately hurt me. "Sophie," I said, my voice shaking, "did you just pull Grandma's hair?" She shrugged, a smirk playing at her lips. "You were being annoying." The words hit me like cold water. This child, this sweet girl I'd rocked to sleep as a baby, whom I'd loved with every fiber of my being, had been taught that hurting people was acceptable when they annoyed you. "Sophie Harris," I said firmly, my voice taking on the teacher tone I'd used with hundreds of children over 4 decades. "That is not acceptable. You hurt Grandma. You need to apologize right now." Her face crumpled, but not with remorse, with rage at being corrected. "No!" she shouted, and then, before I could react, she pinched my arm hard and slapped at my hand. The shock of it paralyzed me. In all my years of teaching, in all my time as a grandmother, I had never been struck by a child. And this wasn't an accident or a tantrum from a toddler. This was deliberate, calculated meanness from a 9-year-old who'd been taught that she could get away with anything. I caught her wrists gently but firmly, holding them still as she thrashed. "Sophie, stop! This is not okay. This is very, very bad behavior." She screamed, a high, piercing sound, and tried to wrench away from me. "Let me go! I hate you!" My heart broke, but I held firm. I realized with crushing clarity that I'd never once disciplined this child, never said no, never corrected. Emily had kept her away so much, and in my desperation to maintain whatever connection I could, I'd only ever spoiled and praised her. And now she was 9 years old and didn't know that hitting people was wrong. "Sophie," I said, raising my voice to be heard over her wailing, my tone stern but not cruel. "You cannot behave this way. You cannot hit people. You cannot pull hair. This is very rude and very wrong. Do you understand me?" She just cried louder, struggling against my gentle grip, her face red with fury rather than shame. "Sophie, I need you to calm down and apologize." I continued firmly. "You hurt Grandma, and that's not acceptable. Say you're sorry, or I'm going to have to talk to your mother about this behavior." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of my failure. Too much permissiveness, too much desperate grandmotherly indulgence trying to make up for Emily's coldness. "Apologize now, Sophie," I said, my voice harder. "Tell Grandma you're sorry, or there will be consequences." That's when Emily burst from the dining room where she'd been watching, her face a mask of theatrical horror. "What are you doing to her?" Emily's voice cut through the air like a whip. She rushed toward us with such force I instinctively stepped back. Sophie immediately ran to her mother, sobbing dramatically. "Did you just hit her?" Emily demanded, her voice rising to a pitch of manufactured outrage. She grabbed Sophie, pulling her close, running her hands over the child's arms as if checking for injuries. "How dare you? How dare you put your hands on my daughter?" "Emily, I started, my voice shaking. "Sophie, baby, tell Mommy the truth." Emily interrupted, her voice dripping with false concern as she knelt down to Sophie's level. Did Grandma hit you? Did she hurt you? No, Sophie said between sobs, her voice small. No, Mommy, I hit Grandma. I pulled her hair and… Shh, it's okay, baby. Emily cut her off as if she hadn't heard a word. You don't have to protect her. Let me see, did she leave marks? She began pulling up Sophie's sleeves, lifting her shirt slightly, examining her arms and back with exaggerated care. All while Sophie stood there confused, saying, Mommy, no, I hit her first, but Emily kept talking over her. I cannot believe this, Emily said, her voice trembling with calculated fury. She looked up at me with eyes full of cold triumph. I leave you alone with my daughter for 10 minutes. 10 minutes and you assault her. I held her wrists to stop her from hitting me, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. She pulled my hair, she pinched me, she slapped me. I was trying to teach her that you can't hurt people. Oh, so now you're blaming a 9-year-old child. Emily stood, positioning herself between Sophie and me like a shield. You grabbed her. You restrained her. You probably left bruises. Sophie, baby, does anything hurt? Show Mommy where Grandma hurt you. Mommy, stop, Sophie cried, genuine distress in her voice now. Grandma didn't hurt me. I was bad. I hit her. But Emily wasn't listening. She was building her narrative, brick by poisonous brick. Charles appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. Emily, that's enough. Margaret would never hurt that child. Really? Emily whirled on him, her eyes blazing, because I just watched her grab my daughter and yell at her. I heard her threatening Sophie with consequences. What kind of consequences, Margaret? What were you planning to do to my child? The accusation hung in the air, vile and absurd. I was going to talk to you, I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice level. About Sophie's behavior? About the fact that she needs to learn respect and boundaries? Emily laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Respect? From you? You want to lecture me about raising my daughter when you can't even take care of yourselves? She pulled Sophie closer, and I saw the girl's confusion, her fear, her growing understanding that something was very wrong. You know what? Emily continued, her voice dropping to something cold and vicious. I've been patient. I've been understanding about your financial situation, about your age, about your declining mental state, but I will not tolerate you putting your hands on my child. She didn't. Sophie tried again, pulling away from her mother. Mom, why aren't you listening? I was mean to Grandma. I pulled her hair really hard and it hurt her. And Sophie, enough. Emily snapped, her mask slipping for just a second. Then she softened her voice artificially. You're just confused, baby. Grandma scared you and you're trying to make sense of it. It's okay. She turned back to me, and her eyes were chips of ice. You want to know the truth, Margaret? Her voice was quiet now, intimate, like she was sharing a secret. If I'd known how poor your family really was, if I'd known about Charles's pathetic failure, about this dump you call a home, about the kind of people you really are, I never would have married into it. She let the words sink in, watching them land like blows. I thought I was marrying up. Turns out I married poverty, delusion, and now violence against children. The room spun. Charles gripped the doorframe, his face white with shock. Sophie had stopped crying, staring at her mother with wide, frightened eyes. Get out, I whispered. What was that? Emily smiled, triumphant. Get out of my house, I said louder now. Get out right now. Gladly. Emily grabbed Sophie's hand. Come on, sweetheart. We're leaving, and we're never coming back. Your father is going to hear about this. Everyone is going to hear about this. She dragged Sophie toward the door. My granddaughter looked back at me, tears streaming down her face. Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I pulled your hair. Please don't be mad at me. I'm not mad at you, sweetheart, I called out, my voice breaking. I love you. I'll always love you. but Emily pulled her through the door and slammed it behind them. The house fell into crushing silence. Charles and I stood frozen, the enormity of what had just happened settling over us like ash. My scalp still throbbed where Sophie had yanked my hair. My arm still stung where she'd pinched me. But worse, so much worse, was the ache in my chest where my heart was breaking. "Margaret," Charles said hoarsely, reaching for me. But I stepped back, trembling with rage and pain and something darker. "I need to go," I said, my voice fracturing. I can't." I grabbed my coat and walked out into the November cold, leaving Charles standing alone in our living room. I walked for hours, through our neighborhood, past the community center, along streets I'd known for decades. The cold bit through my coat, but I barely felt it. My mind was a storm of rage and pain and terrible, crushing clarity. Emily had wanted this. She'd been waiting for it. Some moment, any moment, where she could twist reality and make me the villain. And I'd given it to her by daring to discipline a child who desperately needed it. The sky was turning pink with dawn when I finally stopped at a small park bench near the elementary school where I'd taught. I sat down heavily, my legs aching, my heart aching worse. And in the quiet of that cold morning, I whispered to myself what I should have told Emily, what I should have screamed in her face. "The wound from the rude belongs to the rude, not to the one who receives it." My father's words, the ones he'd taught me about dignity and grace, but I added my own. And I'm going to make sure that wound finds its way home. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called our daughter Lucy. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Mom." "It's 5 a.m. What's wrong?" "Everything," I said simply. "Lucy, I need your help, and I need David's number." Because Emily had made her final mistake. She'd weaponized my granddaughter. She'd accused me of violence. She'd recorded her false narrative in my own home, thinking she was building her case. But what she didn't know was that I'd been recording too. Every word, every lie, every moment of Sophie telling the truth and Emily silencing her. And now there would be no more silence. Now there would only be justice. Lucy arrived at noon, her face tight with worry and barely contained fury. She found me at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes, my hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. Charles sat across from me, his eyes red-rimmed from crying or rage or both. "Mom," Lucy breathed, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Dad called me, told me everything. I let myself be held, breathing in my daughter's familiar scent, lavender and strength. She was 48, stable, solid, the child who'd never caused us a moment's worry. And right now, she was exactly who I needed." She pulled back and looked at me hard. "Tell me you have proof." I nodded slowly. Every word, every moment. "Good." Lucy's jaw clenched. "Because David lands in 3 hours and we're going to end this today." The next 2 hours were a careful orchestration of evidence. Lucy helped me compile everything on her laptop. She was better with technology than I'd ever be. We uploaded the audio recordings, all 23 of them, cataloging each by date and content. Emily's mocking comments, her cruel assessments, her calculated manipulation of David, then the photographs Charles had taken of the cameras, each one time-stamped and geotagged, 4 surveillance devices hidden throughout our home like we were criminals under investigation. Lucy's hands trembled with rage as she typed, but her voice stayed steady. "This is insane," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the screen. "This is actual psychological abuse. Does David have any idea?" "No," Charles said, his voice rough. "She's very good at playing the perfect wife when he's around." Lucy saved everything to a USB drive, then backed it up on the cloud. "We're not taking any chances," she said firmly. "This evidence doesn't leave our control." I watched her work, this strong woman I'd raised, and felt a surge of gratitude mixed with guilt. Why had I waited so long to ask for help? Why had I thought I had to endure this alone? As if reading my mind, Lucy reached over and squeezed my hand. "You were trying to protect Dad," she said softly, "trying to protect all of us. But Mom, silence isn't always protection. Sometimes it's just suffering." Her words hit me like absolution. David called at 2:47 p.m. I watched his name light up my phone screen, my heart hammering. Lucy nodded at me encouragingly. Charles leaned forward in his chair. I answered, putting it on speaker. "Hello, David." "Mom." His voice was tight, strained. "Emily just called me. She's very upset. She says you attacked Sophie? That you and Dad were acting erratically? She wants me to come straight to our house when I land to discuss putting you both in care." The words should have hurt, but I'd spent all my hurt. Now there was only cold determination. "David," I said calmly, my voice steady as stone, "I need you to come to our house instead. There are things you need to see, things you need to hear." "Mom, I don't think—" "David Alexander Harris," I said, using his full name the way I had when he was 10 and needed to listen. "Your sister is here. Your father is here. And we have evidence of things that will change everything you think you know about your wife. You will come here. You will listen. And then you will decide what kind of man you want to be." Silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing, heavy and uncertain. "What kind of evidence?" he asked finally, his voice smaller now. "The kind that doesn't lie," Lucy interjected, her tone sharp. "The kind that Mom and Dad have been collecting because no one would believe them otherwise." "Be here at 5 o'clock, David." Not a minute later. She hung up before he could respond. Charles looked at me with something like awe. "That was necessary," I finished quietly. The waiting was excruciating. We sat in the living room, the three of us, watching the clock tick toward 5. Lucy made sandwiches that none of us ate. Charles paced, his renewed energy burning off months of depression and nervous movement. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, feeling like I was preparing for battle. At 4:53, we heard a car in the driveway. David let himself in, he still had his key, of course, and stopped short when he saw the three of us arranged like a tribunal. He was still in his pilot's uniform, his roller bag abandoned by the door. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice wary. He looked older than I remembered. Tired, the weight of too many flights and too many lies showing in the lines around his eyes. "Sit down," Lucy said, her voice leaving no room for argument. David sat. I reached for the USB drive on the coffee table, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I want you to know," I began carefully, "that what you're about to hear will hurt. It will change things, and there's no going back once you know." "Mom, you're scaring me." David's face was pale. "Good," Charles said bluntly. "You should be scared. Because while you've been flying around the country, trusting your wife, believing her version of events, she's been systematically destroying us." David started to object, but Lucy held up her hand. "Listen first. Defend her after, if you still can." She plugged the USB into her laptop and turned the screen toward David. Then she pressed play. Emily's voice filled our living room, clear and undeniable. First recording. "They're so sentimental. If it weren't for me, this family would fall apart." Second recording. "This house is like a time capsule of sadness. The sooner we get them somewhere with supervision, the better." Third recording. "Did you see him? Still in pajamas at 2 p.m., it's pathetic. They can't take care of themselves anymore." David's face transformed with each clip, moving from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. Fourth recording. "I never would have married into this family if I'd known how poor they really were." That one, her voice so cold, so calculating, made David flinch like he'd been struck. "There's more," Lucy said quietly, advancing to the photographs. "These are surveillance cameras, 4 of them, hidden throughout Mom and Dad's house. Emily installed them without their knowledge or consent." David stared at the images, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "No," he whispered. "No, she wouldn't." "She did," I said firmly. "She watched us, documented us, collected evidence to prove we were incompetent so she could force us into assisted living. Why would she—" David couldn't finish the question. "Control," Charles said bluntly. "She wanted us gone." Out of the way, erased. Lucy played more recordings, Emily talking to her friends about how burdensome we were. Emily on the phone with a realtor, asking about selling our house once the old people are relocated. Emily telling someone, we never found out who, that she was playing the long game and David will agree to anything if I frame it right. Each clip was another wound, another betrayal. David sat frozen, his face ashen, his pilot's composure completely shattered. Finally, Lucy played yesterday's incident, my voice gentle and patient. It's okay, sweetheart. Accidents happen, Sophie's giggle, then Emily's accusation sharp and vicious. Did you just hit her? And finally, the killing blow. If I'd known how poor your family really was, I never would have married into it. The recording ended. The silence that followed was crushing. David's shoulders began to shake. Then tears came, quiet at first, then breaking into sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. Mom, he choked out. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I moved to sit beside him, this son I'd raised, this good man who'd been deceived. I put my arm around his shoulders the way I had when he was small, and the world felt too big. I know, I said softly. She was very careful. Very convincing. How long? He asked, his voice breaking. How long has she been doing this? Since the beginning. Charles replied quietly. Since before you married her. We just didn't realize it until it was almost too late. David looked up at me, his face wet with tears. What she said about Sophie, Mom, I need to hear it again. Lucy rewound to that moment. We listened together as Emily accused me of hitting Sophie, as she dismissed Charles's defense, as she weaponized my granddaughter against me. When it finished, David stood abruptly. His face had transformed, grief replaced by something harder, colder. Where's my daughter? He asked, his voice tight with controlled rage. At home with Emily, I replied. David, what are you going to do? He looked at me, and I saw my son, really saw him for the first time in years, the boy who'd always stood up for what was right, even when it cost him. I'm going to get my daughter, he said firmly, and then I'm going to end my marriage. We didn't let David go alone. Lucy insisted on driving. David's hands were shaking too badly to be trusted behind a wheel. Charles and I sat in the back seat, silent witnesses to our son's unraveling. The drive to David and Emily's house took 23 minutes. I counted every one of them, watching the Seattle suburbs blur past, my heart hammering a steady rhythm against my ribs. David stared out the window, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Once he turned to me and opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. What could he say? What words existed for this kind of betrayal? Lucy's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Are you sure you want Mom and Dad there for this? She asked quietly. Yes. David's voice was flat, final. Emily needs to see what she's done. She needs to face all of us. The house looked peaceful from the outside. A modern 2-story with tasteful landscaping and expensive cars in the driveway. Emily's domain, her carefully constructed kingdom. We walked to the door together, a united front. David used his key and we stepped into the entryway that smelled of vanilla candles and something bitter underneath, the scent of secrets kept too long. Emily, David called out, his voice steady despite the storm I knew raged inside him. We need to talk. She appeared at the top of the stairs, already dressed for battle in designer loungewear that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. When she saw all of us, her face went through a rapid transformation. Surprise, calculation, then smooth concern. David, honey. Her voice was warm, welcoming, with just a touch of worry. I didn't expect you to bring everyone. Is this about yesterday? Because I've been thinking and maybe I overreacted. Come downstairs, Emily. David interrupted, his tone cold as January. You're going to want to sit down for this. Something in his voice must have warned her. Her smile faltered, then reassembled itself. She descended the stairs gracefully, every movement calculated, and I marveled at how perfectly she could perform, even when the stage was collapsing beneath her. We moved to the living room, pristine, magazine-worthy, devoid of any warmth. Emily perched on the edge of the designer couch, arranging her face into appropriate wifely concern. "Where's Sophie?" David asked abruptly. "At her friend Madison's house." "Why?" Emily's eyes darted between us, assessing, calculating her next move. "Good." David pulled out his phone, and I saw his hand trembling as he navigated to the files Lucy had sent him. "Because she doesn't need to hear this." Emily's mask slipped slightly. "Hear what exactly?" Instead of answering, David pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room, clear and damning. "They're so sentimental. If it weren't for me, this family would fall apart." Her face went pale, then flushed red. "David, I can explain." "Don't." His voice cut like glass. "Don't say a word. Just listen." He played clip after clip, her mocking us, calling us burdensome, planning to sell our house. Each recording was a nail in the coffin of their marriage. Emily's composure cracked with each one, her hands twisted in her lap, her breathing growing shallow. When we reached the recording about marrying into poverty, she flinched visibly. "These are out of context," she said desperately, her voice rising. "David, you have to understand. I was venting. Everyone vents to their friends." "Friends?" Charles's voice was sharp with disgust. "You were plotting." "There's a difference." David held up his hand for silence, then showed her the photographs of the cameras. "Did you install surveillance equipment in my parents' home?" Emily opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her eyes were wide, trapped. It was for their safety. They're getting older, and I was worried." "Liar." The word came from me, quiet but absolute. "You were collecting evidence to have us declared incompetent, to force us out of our home." Emily's face transformed, the mask finally completely shattered. What remained was ugly, desperate, cornered. "So what if I was?" she spat, her voice losing all its practiced sweetness. "Look at them, David. Your father's a failure who lost everything. Your mother's a stubborn old woman who won't accept reality. They're drowning, and they're too proud to admit it." The venom in her voice was shocking in its nakedness. David stood slowly, his face carved from stone. "Get out." Emily blinked. "What?" "Get out of this house," he repeated, his voice deadly calm. "Pack a bag. Leave. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning." She laughed, a high, brittle sound. "You can't be serious." "Over this? Over some recordings and your parents' hurt feelings?" "Over the fact that you tortured my parents," David said, his voice rising now, years of betrayal finally breaking through. "Over the fact that you used our daughter as a weapon. Over the fact that you installed cameras in their home like they were criminals. Over the fact that every word out of your mouth has been a calculated lie." Emily stood, her face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this. I'll take everything. Sophie will grow up knowing her father chose his pathetic parents over her mother. Sophie will grow up knowing the truth." David replied coldly. "She'll know her mother tried to destroy her grandparents. And she'll grow up with them, learning what real kindness looks like." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. "You can't take her from me. Watch me." David pulled out his phone again. "I'm calling my lawyer right now. And then I'm getting a restraining order to keep you away from my parents." Emily turned to me, her eyes blazing. "This is your fault," she hissed, all pretense of civility gone. "You turned him against me. You manipulated him with your victim act." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a deep, bone-tired relief that the truth was finally visible. "I didn't turn him against you, Emily," I said quietly. "I just let him hear your own words. You destroyed yourself." She lunged toward me, but Lucy stepped between us, her face fierce with protective rage. Touch my mother, and I'll make sure every word of those recordings goes viral, she said icily. Your reputation, your social circle, your perfect image, all of it gone. Emily froze, and I saw fear flicker across her face for the first time. David was already on the phone with his lawyer, his voice crisp and professional despite the emotional devastation. Emily stood in the middle of her perfect living room, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed lies, and I watched something inside her collapse. You'll never prove any of this in court, she said desperately. It's your word against mine. No, Charles said, standing up with renewed dignity. It's your words against you. We have everything, every recording, every photograph, every text message where you discussed our situation with your friends. The fight drained out of her. She sank back onto the couch, her designer clothes suddenly looking cheap, her perfect makeup unable to hide the ugliness beneath. David finished his call and turned back to his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife. You have 1 hour to pack essential items and leave. My lawyer is filing an emergency motion for full custody. Sophie will stay with me and my parents until this is settled. David, please. Emily's voice broke, and for the first time I heard something almost like genuine emotion. But it was too late, and we all knew it. You made your choice when you decided my parents were disposable, David said flatly. Now live with the consequences. We left her there, sitting alone in her pristine house, surrounded by expensive things that suddenly meant nothing. In the car, David broke down completely. Lucy pulled over, and we held him while he sobbed. Great heaving cries that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and wounded. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm so sorry I let her hurt you. I stroked his hair the way I had when he was small, when the world was simpler and pain could be soothed with gentle words. You see it now, I said softly. That's what matters. Charles reached over and gripped his son's shoulder. You did the right thing. That takes courage. The drive home was quiet, heavy with the weight of endings and new beginnings. When we pulled into our driveway, David looked at our small, modest house, the one Emily had called a dump, and something in his face softened. Can Sophie and I stay here? He asked quietly. Just for a while, until I figure things out. This is your home, Charles said firmly, both of you. For as long as you need. That night, we sat around our old kitchen table, drinking tea and beginning the slow process of healing. And somewhere in Seattle, in a perfect house that felt like a mausoleum, Emily sat alone with her choices. But our story wasn't quite finished, because Sophie still needed to come home, and I still had lessons to teach. Sophie came home 3 days later, clutching a small pink suitcase and looking like a ghost of herself. David picked her up from Madison's house. Emily had dropped her there before the confrontation, and thankfully Madison's parents had agreed to keep her until the dust settled. When they pulled into our driveway, I watched from the window as Sophie climbed out slowly, her small face pale and uncertain. She'd been told something. Not everything, but enough to know her world had fractured. I met them at the door, my heart aching at the fear in my granddaughter's eyes. She looked at me like I might be angry, like I might blame her for her mother's sins. Hello, sweetheart, I said gently, kneeling down despite my protesting knees. Welcome home. Sophie's lower lip trembled. Grandma, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice so small it nearly broke me. I'm sorry Mom said I hit you. I didn't mean to pull your hair, I was just playing. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her small body shake with sobs she'd been holding in. Oh, honey, I murmured into her hair. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. None of this is your fault. We stood there in the doorway, grandmother and granddaughter, while the November wind blew cold around us. David watched with tears streaming down his face, and Charles put a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. Finally, Sophie pulled back and looked up at me with those serious 9-year-old eyes. Is Mom coming here too? No, sweetheart, I said honestly because children deserve truth spoken gently. Your mom and dad are taking some time apart, but you're going to stay here with us and your dad. Is that okay? She nodded slowly, then surprised me by taking my hand. Can I have the room with the yellow curtains? The one Dad used to sleep in? My throat tightened. That room is yours for as long as you want it. The first weeks were delicate, like handling something precious that might shatter if held too tightly. Sophie moved through our house quietly, carefully, as if afraid to take up space. She'd been trained by Emily to be perfect. No mess, no noise, no childish inconvenience. Watching her eat dinner with such studied politeness, seeing her apologize for every small thing, made my heart ache with rage at what had been stolen from her. But slowly, carefully, I began to teach her something different. One afternoon, she spilled juice on the kitchen counter. I watched her face go white with panic, watched her scramble for paper towels with hands that shook. "Sophie," I said softly, stilling her frantic movements, "look at me, sweetheart." She looked up, eyes wide with fear. "Spills happen," I said gently, my voice warm with the patience I'd learned from 40 years of teaching frightened children. "They're not crimes, they're just spills. We clean them up together and then we move on, okay?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Mom always said I was careless when I spilled things." I knelt beside her, my old knees complaining but my heart steady. "Your mom was wrong about many things," I said carefully. "Being human isn't careless. Making mistakes isn't failure. Do you understand?" She nodded, not quite believing yet, but wanting to. We cleaned up the spill together, and I showed her how to wring out the dishcloth, how to wipe in circles, how to make even mundane tasks feel companionable rather than punitive. "Grandma?" she asked when we were done. "Why did Mom say those mean things about you and Grandpa?" I sat down at the kitchen table, and Sophie climbed into the chair beside me. Through the window, I could see Charles in the backyard, teaching David how to prune the rose bushes properly. Father and son finding their way back to each other through simple tasks. "Sometimes," I began carefully, "people forget that being polite isn't the same as being kind. Your mom learned how to say the right words, but she forgot to mean them." Sophie considered this seriously. "What's the difference?" "Politeness is about following rules," I explained, reaching for her small hand. "Kindness is about making people feel safe and loved. Your mom was very polite, but she wasn't always kind." "Are you kind, Grandma?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about Emily's accusations, about my silence, about all the times I'd swallowed hurt to keep peace. "I try to be," I said honestly, "but I made mistakes too. I was quiet when I should have been brave. I let things happen that I should have stopped." Sophie squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Dad says you were brave. He says you saved us." My eyes filled with tears. "We saved each other, sweetheart." That's what families do. Over the following months, I watched Sophie transform. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden revelation or miraculous change. It was gradual, like watching ice melt in spring. Small moments of courage, tiny rebellions against the perfection Emily had demanded. She laughed louder. She asked questions without apologizing first. She got dirt under her fingernails from helping Charles in the garden and didn't immediately scrub them clean. One day, I found her reading on the couch with her feet tucked under her, completely absorbed in a story, cookie crumbs on her shirt. She looked up and smiled at me, a real smile, unguarded and bright. "This book is really good, Grandma," she said enthusiastically. "Want to read it with me?" I sat beside her and she curled against me like she used to when she was small, before Emily had taught her that affection was something to be rationed and controlled. We read together in comfortable silence, and I felt something settle in my chest. Peace, maybe, or hope. In March, Sophie's school held an awards assembly. David took time off to attend. Charles and I sat in the elementary school auditorium, the same one where I'd taught for decades, watching children fidget in their seats and parents snap photographs. When the principal called Sophie's name for the Kindness Award, my heart swelled so large I thought it might burst. She walked to the stage, her steps more confident than they'd been 6 months ago, and accepted the certificate with a genuine smile. The principal explained that Sophie had been nominated by 3 different teachers for consistently helping other students, for being patient with struggling classmates, for creating an atmosphere of acceptance in her classroom. Sophie demonstrates, the principal read from the nomination, that true courtesy isn't about perfection. It's about making others feel valued and safe. I watched my granddaughter stand on that stage, holding her certificate with trembling fingers, and I saw myself in her. The girl I'd been, the teacher I'd become, the woman who'd finally learned that grace without boundaries isn't grace at all. After the assembly, Sophie ran to us, her face glowing. "Did you see, Grandma? Did you see?" "I saw, sweetheart," I said, pulling her close. "I'm so proud of you." She looked up at me with those serious eyes. "You taught me that, about being kind instead of just polite." "You taught yourself," I corrected gently. "I just reminded you of what was already inside you." That evening, David helped Sophie hang the certificate on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like an apple, one I'd used when he was young. Charles and I sat at the kitchen table, drinking tea and watching our family slowly knit itself back together. The divorce had been finalized the month before. Emily had fought for custody but lost when the recordings were presented to the judge. She had supervised visitation now, once a month, and even that felt like too much. But Sophie was healing. We all were. Later, after Sophie was in bed, I opened my dresser drawer and pulled out the small recorder. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, lighter than it should be for something that had changed everything. "Are you going to throw it away?" Charles asked from the doorway. I looked at him, this man who'd rediscovered his strength when it mattered most. "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to keep it. As a weapon, as a reminder." I turned the recorder over in my hands, watching light glint off its surface. That truth matters. That silence can be survival, but speaking up is living. That grace isn't surrender. It's strength held with intention. I tucked it back into the drawer, beneath my scarves and gloves, and closed it gently. Now, every morning, I wake to the sound of Sophie's laughter drifting through our old house. I make tea as sunrise filters through curtains that Emily once called outdated. The light turns everything golden and warm, touching our worn furniture, our faded wallpaper, our lived-in life with gentle approval. Sophie comes down for breakfast, her hair still messy from sleep, and tells me about her dreams. David makes pancakes, slightly burned, perfectly imperfect. Charles reads the newspaper and makes terrible jokes that make us all groan. This is what Emily couldn't understand, what she couldn't see past her obsession with appearances and control. A home isn't measured by the price of its furniture or the modernness of its fixtures. It's measured by the laughter it holds, the love it shelters, the grace it extends even when tested beyond measure. I keep the recorder in my drawer not out of anger, but as quiet proof that dignity survives even the harshest betrayal. That truth, when finally spoken, has the power to restore what cruelty tried to destroy. And I've learned something my father tried to teach me 74 years ago. Grace isn't silence. It isn't endurance. It isn't swallowing hurt to keep peace. Grace is knowing when to speak, when to fight, when to protect what matters most. The wounds others inflict do eventually return to their rightful owners. Emily lives alone now in her perfect house, her perfect image shattered, her relationships built on manipulation and control collapsing one by one. But we live here, in our imperfect home with our secondhand furniture, and our faded wallpaper, and our deep, unshakable love. And every morning, when I pour that first cup of tea, I whisper the truth I finally learned. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in staying silent, it's in making sure your voice gets heard.